Welcome to Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. The whole idea of diversity, equity, inclusion, the whole idea of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, these are not just literal alphabet soups. These are some of the values that some corporates in Malaysia and beyond actually carry. One of them is, of course, Maybank Investment Banking Group. So therefore, we have a treat for you this evening. Joining us on the line is Dato Ami Moris, the CEO of Maybank Investment Banking Group. Amy, thank you again for taking the time to speak with us. I honestly believe that Maybank is one of those corporates that actually imbue and actually talk about this and doing it at the same time. And therefore, I'd like to harken back to the Maybank's annual Invest ASEAN conference that you guys just did. You talked about framing a future, and what was interesting during that conference, at least for me, is that you guys are not just talking about the bland or what's there in the future, and therefore we talk about it. It's also what we want it to be, framing it in that way. Diversity, inclusion, equity, sustainability, governance, and of course environmental consciousness awareness. Those are the kind of things that we want to look at. One key item, of course, is, for instance, the ESG compendium, right? When we saw your colleagues, Anan, for instance, or Suhaimi, talking about those things, and we want to see how this is actually going to be carried forward, not just in Maybank Investment Banking Group, but the corporates in Malaysia and beyond as well. So maybe, Dato Ami, you can share with us some of the values and ideas that were shared during the Invest ASEAN conference that you guys did very recently, and what does this mean to you as an organization?
Thanks, Ibrahim. Great to be with you today on Notepad. A lot to unpack for sure, but maybe to start, right? As we are very acutely aware, we live in a world which has seen very profound structural changes over the last few years. Whether it is in terms of the way we work, in our supply chains, in our ability to develop research, and above all, what we've recently experienced to combat diseases, particularly with COVID, for example. So collectively in our humanity to support one another in times of need. So these changes are definitely accelerated by the twin factors of the pandemic and geopolitical tensions comes at a time when the world will need to show what I call delivery on climate mitigation initiatives. This year will be the year of COP27, which will be held in Egypt later in November. So in terms of setting the context for Invest ASEAN, definitely we went in knowing that it's not a new normal, but a new reality. And against this backdrop, in my view, three fairly clear paths forward were gleaned in the conversations that took place simultaneously, very ambitiously, across the ASEAN 6 capital cities. They took over 2 days and over 80 speakers from around the globe. So the three key takeouts. Firstly, it was clear that it is important for ASEAN to take a cohesive and neutral position amid geopolitical tensions, as the region is likely to remain a beneficiary of supply chain relocations from China. And this is natural for global businesses who need to hedge their infrastructure alignment. Secondly, it is no longer business as it was. Sustainability and climate transition will be key drivers of opportunities, particularly when we see the harmonization of ESG reporting standards and taxonomies, which are very near in the horizon. Lastly, going pretty much hand in hand with sustainability is the increasing adoption of what you mentioned at the start: diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. DEI as a solid business case. At Invest ASEAN, I had a great conversation, great opportunity to speak with Peter Grauer, the chairman of Bloomberg, who is also the chair of the 30% Club USA. And we were pretty much aligned on the idea that allowing more diverse voices at the table, removing barriers to economic opportunity, and ensuring no one is left behind is pretty much going to be a big theme of this decade. There is little, definitely everyone is facing a battle for talent right now, and the DEI business case is helping to bolster what I call the competitiveness of companies that choose a DEI path.
I spoke to your colleague on air on this show a few days ago, Anand Patmakantan. He is, of course, the regional equities head of Maybank IB. And he was talking about some corporates still look at ESG, for instance, as an OPEX kind of play rather than a CAPEX kind of play. And of course, what he also means is that you need to, bake this into the strategy, fix some ideas of long-term cost into it, because the pain could be short term, but the benefits is definitely long term. And it's hard for companies to do this. They probably know that this should be the case, but the issue is that you and I are fully aware of the storm coming our way. Inflationary pressures are in, central banks tightening their policies, consumers facing a very tough battle in terms of trying to spend more when their own costs are going up. So all these storms are just facing us right now. How do you think companies can keep an eye out on driving the sustainability agenda, the DEI agenda, while looking at these possible pressures coming in our way right now?
Okay, Ibrahim, so let me answer that question that you have so articulately posed. And let me answer that question by not making it a question of either or. We know historically that companies, a lot of publications have come out globally, that companies with higher ESG ratings make for more compelling investments. And this is largely because, look, they are generally better managed companies that have sound and consistent business policies and practices. So, for example, Maybank Investment Banking Group, our research, we back tested about 190 companies under our research coverage, which our universe is over 300. We did the back testing across the ASEAN 6 markets and found that those with higher ESG ratings, as measured by Sustainalytics, our data provider, generated excess returns over the relevant benchmark. In this case, the benchmark is the MSCI All Country ASEAN Index, and that excess returns amounted to an average of 3.9% per annum for 3 years up to 31st March of 2022. So for me, it is in times like these that you really want to be investing in well-managed companies that have an eye not only on their financial future, but also with an eye on the risks that may be further down the road. As you've mentioned right at the start, we want to be able to look at corporate resilience, not only immediate term, medium term, but definitely also on longer term. And as we know, ESG metrics, right, the metrics around environment, social, and governance, they help provide that platform and are generally a key component of a company's what we call de-risking strategy. So as we enter this new economic cycle, I believe we will see a similar trend of quality ESG companies outpacing those that are not looking at all lanes of the road ahead. In short, Ibrahim, these challenging times for me are when companies really need to maintain the fortitude in executing the sustainability plans, their commitments and pledges.
You speak to a lot of corporates, you speak to a lot of all different sizes and it comes in different shapes as well. And you would probably have a sense of where some ideas of sustainability can come from. What would be some of the ideas that you think you're seeing right now in the sustainability space? And do you think that this is evolving fast enough for corporates to adopt or at least observe and be aware of in the first place?
Yes, there's a lot of what I call ESG bashing, green bashing that's going on right now.
It's called greenwashing, Dato Ami.
Yeah,
Greenwashing, not green
and also
bashing.
green bashing.
Okay. Anyway, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
But what I would like to say is that within as our role as a capital market intermediary and how we see the developments in the world of sustainability is that the interest firstly is real, and secondly that sustainable financing has been growing exponentially. Climate action and managing climate risks definitely have to be on the agenda of all boards, and this is simply because and largely due to the fact that governments in this region, all of us, together with about 180 other nations globally, we have all made further commitments to cutting greenhouse gas emissions and reducing our reliance on fossil fuel. This was as per what was announced at last year's COP26 in Glasgow. And alongside that, what we have also agreed on globally is that the intent is to do yearly check-ins from this year, starting with COP27 in November. So that will be a good test to see where things stand. Coming back to also the framing, right? You were asking about the framing of ASEAN, the future of ASEAN. I think very interesting data point that I would like to share here is that the ASEAN sustainable debt market continued to grow in 2021. There was a record issuance of what we call the GSS debt, the Green, Social, and Sustainability debt. That totaled about $24 billion, which is a doubling from 2020. So, in context, however, that is less than 5% of the total debt financing that we have seen. And but the growth is exponential, and the fact that it's only 5%, and I think for Malaysia it's slightly below 8%, there is clearly a lot of headroom in terms of opportunities. So capital market intermediaries like us, investment banks, regulators, everyone is stepping up on climate risk disclosures, particularly, and harmonizing standards. Once this is in place, it will definitely elevate investor confidence, in my view. And also, when we're talking about all this in terms of covering disclosures, one crucial aspect that I would also like to emphasize here is the governance. The governance of arriving at these disclosures. Who oversees them? What does the internal connectivity look like? And most importantly, board committees, such as risk committees, are they actively involved in the process of disclosure? So maybe I'll stop here because,
No, but it's okay because you see, I find it quite interesting. Khazanah, for instance, have published their own annual report, and I don't find much diversity in their board of directors. I believe that if it doesn't permeate from the top, it's very hard for them to impose the kind of diversity and equity and inclusion into the companies that they're in. Why I'm bringing this up because, well, I guess you guys belong to PNB. So the idea here is, of course, how do you ensure that governance and diversity and inclusiveness is done by every single stakeholder in the country and perhaps some of the big corporates around ASEAN as well. It's not that easy to impose this kind of changes if the will isn't there from the top down. What do you think on this?
To me, again, if we were to emphasize on ESG metrics, right? The G is on governance, and while we talk about DEI, it's very easy to make the conclusion that DEI is a gender or gender equality issue. But being in the business over the last 3 decades, my firm conviction, right, is what matters most to an organization is people. It is people that build successful businesses. So here I want to emphasize that DEI is good for business. So for companies that have yet to embrace that 30%, I guess, target, and there's no magical formula to that 30%. It's simply that to just have one, for example, for the case of gender diversity, to just have one woman on the board, that lone voice will be very easily overwhelmed. Two, what typically people can use the divide and rule strategy, but as we also say, three is a crowd. It's a lot easier to then open up conversations, to have more honest conversations in boardrooms. So I want to emphasize that D here is good for business. A study that was conducted by the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, for example, which kind of looked at 300 of our top companies under Bursa Malaysia. What they observed was that boards with at least one-third women representation correlates with 38% higher median ROE than boards with no women representation. So ultimately, what DEI, and I think this is a message that probably Khazanah, for instance, right, are very cognizant of. DEI breaks groupthink. It leads to creative tension. Yes, of course, it's certainly easier and faster to work with people you're familiar and comfortable with, but you may overlook blind spots and miss out new opportunities as well.
How do you then achieve just development or balance between economic recovery and sustainability? I'm trying to move away from the DEI conversation, try to look at how we can equitably build wealth, particularly in a climate where times could be challenging for corporates big and small.
Uh, Maybe because you said, like, let's move to more the question of sustainability, right? How do we achieve the just development between economic recovery, for example, something that we are going through, and sustainability, and also to enable wealth creation activities, or for example, across societies. But maybe again, for me, how I would like to approach that question is that it's no longer going to be all or nothing. That approach, when you consider very poignantly that it is the lower income groups that were most affected by the 2-year pandemic. They are also the ones that are most likely to be affected by the effects of climate change, such as losing their homes due to persistent flooding. Now, all that discourse naturally has been extensively covered during the pandemic. But nevertheless, what we need to really acknowledge is that ASEAN needs to deal with sustainability related climate change. It does need to be able to address and invest in these areas, particularly because of the region's vulnerability to the impact from severe temperatures and rising sea levels. And perhaps what I would like to emphasize here additionally is that very much embodied in the sustainability agenda and the 2015 Paris Agreement that we have both mentioned are also the imperatives of DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion aspects. So in a way, the DEI and sustainability parts of the equations are pretty much two sides of the same coin.
Okay, we're still in the middle of this conversation, but we have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss a little bit more with Dato Ami Moris, the CEO of Maybank IB. Thanks for staying on with us. On the line right now is Dato Ami Moris, the CEO of Maybank Investment Banking Group. She's also the chair of the 30% Club in Malaysia since October 2021. Amy, let's talk a little bit more about that 30% Club. Now, we touched a little bit before the break on some of the diversity and inclusion and how it can lead to a break of groupthink and how the diversity could ensure the critical element of the best ideas come forward on earth. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about being the chair of the 30% Club. How ready do you think companies are for DEI, especially not just in the context of gender balance, but especially in terms of inclusion and the diversity element, and not just in Malaysia, but in ASEAN as well?
So Ibrahim, how I would like to kind of tackle this question, to me, ultimately, it is about capacity building of people who have the right skill sets and above all, mindset, right? And when we talk about the progress, say, let's start with Malaysia, the progress has definitely been encouraging. In Malaysia, from the time that the 30% Club was established in 2015, the percentage of women holding board seats in aggregate among the top 100 PLCs is doubled from 13% in 2014 to 26% today. However, encouraging as it sounds, how I would like to look at it is to put it in numbers. Of the top 100 PLCs, only 46 companies actually have over 30% women on their boards. Naturally, this is an increase. We only had about 41 companies last year. So, but in terms of aggregate, the number of women on total number of boards, in terms of the top 100, Malaysia is somewhat ahead of its peers in ASEAN. We have 26% board representation amongst top 100 PLCs. This compares to our neighbors Thailand. From the Stock Exchange of Thailand, they are at 19%, and Singapore, it is about 20%. So we do expect to see more movement following the recent announcement by Bursa mandating. This is interesting because Bursa has finally mandated listed companies and issuers to have at least one woman on board. For companies that have a market cap above 2 billion, this needs to be fulfilled by September of this year. And for those below 2 billion ringgit market cap, that has to be complied with by June of next year. But maybe just to digress a bit, Ibrahim, and really to emphasize and clarify why boards are very important and why there is an increasing emphasis in conversations on inclusivity and diversity of boards. You see, because it comes back that better DEI equals better ESG, better investability. DEI underpins the imperatives in achieving E, S, and G metrics, the environmental, the social, and governance metrics. And above all, what many publications have shown, and something that I really, cannot emphasize more, is that well-governed companies and organizations with robust boards, by what we mean by robust is that boards that challenge assumptions, right? By asking the right and strategic questions to facilitate A, transparency, and B, accountability as part of their fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. These boards will create better quality companies that truly understand their rights to win.
Okay, this is the part, right? Because when we look at the importance of boards and the critical nature of it, you know, to ask strategic questions, as you put it, then wouldn't it be better to get the best person for the job rather than try to force fit, you know, people just so that you can fit that quota? Say, for instance, at above 2 billion market cap, you get one lady in, for instance. How do we balance between diversity and inclusivity versus the critical nature of a board? And not many. First of all, there's not many talents that can take up a board job already, regardless of gender. But this whole force fit into this whole nature of diversity, how does this sit in terms of trying to create diversity, but at the same time get the best person for the job?
Okay, interestingly, what you have said, yes, some boards may appoint a woman to fill prevailing prescriptions. And this is what we now, the fashionable term, I believe, is pink washing, right? So for real change to take
There's a
place,
lot of washing, yeah? Blue washing, pink washing, green washing, there you go.
yeah, laundry is a very interesting activity. Yeah. So, to answer your question in a pointed fashion, for real change to take place, our focus, right, our focus at the 30% Club is to ensure that it will not be just a box ticking exercise, and that our public listed companies continue to diversify and achieve the critical target of 30%. But in my view, ultimately boards are accountable to shareholders, so therefore they need to be wise in their decisions, and to adhere to good corporate governance. The board candidate has to be appointed based on fit for the job, fit in terms of qualifications and expertise, right? So in this sense, this is where we say the candidates is one thing, right? Getting diversity of candidates. And I have really kind of taken headhunters to task when they show me lists that are just with male candidates. But the other point also to make is that the diversity very much upstream. That means the diversity at the selection panel. That is also something that the board nominations committee must be extremely vigilant about, to make sure that there is representation at the selection panel. But coming back to how do we make sure that companies really are able to achieve gender balance in boardrooms, my call out is to high caliber women to really put up their hands and be ready to sit on boards. This means we have to continue to feed the pipeline of competent with the pipe to fill the pipeline with competent women leaders, and that's what 30% Club has been doing together with our partners. And this is about ensuring we dig deep enough in our search for candidates. Rather than talking only about diversity, as I've mentioned, the diversity also at the selection panel is critical, because, just to segue to another conversation that is really that is really building momentum, is also about biases. This year's theme for the International Women's Day is about break the
Yeah.
bias, because biases, as we know, are both unconscious and sometimes unintended, even unintended in relation to women, or biases against women. There's a lot of built-in biases over time, cultural knowledge that we have absorbed about women, their role in society, and how they even should behave and speak.
All right. We don't have much time left. I just want to ask you one more thing. What specific items, other than the hiring selection that you guys are doing in Maybank, what other specific items that Maybank is doing per se? Maybe you can speak on behalf of the Maybank IB Group per se, but not necessarily the Maybank Group. But your house, your shop, how are you guys improving the changes right now?
I think we are clearly very proud of two things. One is that we have now set up a dedicated sustainable financing team. Uh, the overall Maybank Group, we have a commitment to mobilize 50 billion ringgit towards sustainable financing. That's by 2025. And we are very proud to say that as of end 2021, Maybank has already achieved close to 14 billion ringgit in terms of mobilization of capital. This can be clearly, evidenced from the landmark deals that we have come up with. Firstly, is the SME Bank's 500 million sustainability Sukuk Wakala. This is a first for a development financial institution in Malaysia, and also on Agrobank's 1 billion ringgit sustainability Sukuk program. Again, Malaysia's first based on the Securities Commission's sustainable and responsible framework. So really, to me, it's kudos to the team, Maybank Investment Bank, led by Dato Fadil, really living, breathing, eating, sleeping sustainability. And for that, I think we have been recognized as the best sustainable bank in Malaysia by Finance Asia. And the second part that we are also really focused on is sustainable investing, making sure that we are able to guide our investors, understand for them to understand, how do you do selection criteria, what are the technologies that can enable, right, for them to have more effective view of companies. And lastly, also the fact that we have actually set up a dedicated sustainability research team, completed all our country compendiums, and we have qualitative analysis of all the companies under our coverage. So these are the
I
what we
do.
are doing in terms of walking the talk.
I do read the ESG compendium country by country. That's how I don't know how sad my life is, Amy. Maybe I could read some other novel, but yeah. But I mean, jokes aside, I do read the ESG compendium because I do feel that these are some of the items that really it's worth keeping track of. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left. Maybe some parting words before we conclude this or adjourn this interview.
I guess there are many, we live in a very exciting world. I am very, very inspired and very ambitious about what we as humanity can achieve in this new reality, and definitely a new economic cycle. So, but very much at the heart of it will be sustainability. Sustainability will be the key driver of opportunities and risks in ASEAN and also Malaysia. So we as individuals, Ibrahim, we do have the responsibility, apart from reading Maybank Investment Banking Group's compendiums on sustainability, we do have the responsibility to move the needle forward. We need to use our capital, whether it be in terms of investments or daily purchase decisions, to help drive a just, profitable, sustainable, and diverse marketplace. So tomorrow's winners, watch out, are those perhaps not today's winners, but those that are pursuing sustainable and inclusive growth for tomorrow.
Thank you very much. That was Dato Ami Moris, the CEO of Maybank Investment Banking Group. She's also the chair of the 30% Club in Malaysia. There's a lot of conversations like this that can be seen, heard and watched on Astro AWANI. Just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad over there. You can also search Niaga AWANI. Much of the business conversations also take place there as well. That's it from me for this particular episode. Catch you in the next one.